I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Vengreso, and we are the creators of flymessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And I'm excited to spend some time talking to you today about really some of my favorite topics, how to convert more prospects into customers. Yes, I have with me Mr. David Kurkjian, my friend. He is the founder of Master Messaging. And you're going to spend some time listening to him talking about his new book, yes, 6X, Convert More Prospects to Customers. So for all of you listening in, you will want to pay close attention to the details inside of this podcast. David, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, Mario, it's good to be here. Excited to have this conversation.
Well, thank you for joining me. I'm excited to have you here. Do me a favor, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, the company, the organization, and then I've got a very special question I need to ask you.
Oh, yeah. So I am the founder of Master Messaging, founded the company 11 years ago on the heels of 35 years in corporate America, either selling or leading sales organizations. I figured out later in my career that my superpower, where I could really bring more value to sales professionals, was really more around coaching and consulting around these early stage selling conversations. And one of the decisions that I made in creating Master Messaging, the content that we present to sales professionals, is that wanted to base it on behavioral psychology. And the reason for doing that, I've sat through so many sales training courses where I hear an accomplished sales professional standing up in front of the room, says something like this: "Hey, I was great. You can be great too. Just do what I did." And then they start telling all the things that they did to create success. And I would sit in those workshops, and I was the one that would raise my hand and go, "Why should I do that? Give me what's behind it. What's the principle or technique behind it?" So when I founded Master Messaging, I never wanted to be in the position of standing in front of the room with these accomplished sales professionals and not be able to answer the question why, which is why I spent time reading over 20 books on behavioral psychology to get specifically to what's going on inside of a prospect's head when they're making a buying decision. How are they processing the information and coming to a decision? So just a little bit about me. And again, excited to hear the question that you have top of mind.
I love it. Well, as always and customary, I do ask a very special question to all my guests, and that is, tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles.
Yeah, so the answer to that question would be I'm a barefoot runner. So this was about 8 years ago. I've been a runner my entire life. I've actually logged enough miles to run around the equator in my lifetime. And 8 years ago, I developed some severe arthritis in my right knee. And I knew if I went to an orthopedist, exactly what they would say: get a knee replacement. And I'm like, no, too young. It's going to inhibit my ability to be active. At the time, a friend of mine introduced me to a book called Born to Run. And it is what introduced, those Vibram finger shoes. But the shoe companies did that, not realizing that the author of the book actually was advocating running completely barefoot on concrete, which is what I now do. For the last 8 years, I've developed and changed my running form to run barefoot on concrete. And believe it or not, I could do that with an arthritic right knee and not be in pain.
Wow. So you don't use the little shoes with the 5 toes?
Nope, completely barefoot on concrete.
Aren't you afraid that you're going to step on something, a glass, rock, or anything?
I in the 8 years of doing this, most of the running that I do are on manicured sidewalks or a track. So I'm not running, like in trails or that type of thing. I did cut my foot once on a piece of glass that I didn't see. And I found out pretty quickly that your feet are really resilient, and it stopped bleeding within about 10 minutes and I could continue to run.
Oh my God. I would have been the baby. Take me home. Take me home. All right, that is pretty interesting. I haven't had anybody talk about barefoot running, and I don't know if I'd be brave enough. I mean, I hate walking outside, and those little rocks, those little pebbles, they hurt the most when you step right on that edge, and it just right there, and you're just like, ah. So you're pretty brave, man.
Yeah, yeah. I had a funny experience when I first started barefoot running. You couldn't just go from running 8 miles with shoes to running 8 miles barefoot. So what I would do is I would put my shoes on my hands and then run a mile, and then put the shoes onto my feet so I could finish the run. And you can only imagine the looks I would get from people running down the street with shoes on my hands and nothing on my feet.
That's a TikTok video that has to be done. You got to make a TikTok video on that one. That would be actually quite funny and comical.
Yeah.
Very good, interesting. All right, all right. So barefoot running, very good. Now you've also have something else very special that's just happened. You released a brand new book, and I mentioned it earlier on in the show. 6x convert more prospects to customers. Tell me the name. Like, where'd you get the name from?
Yeah, so the 6X comes from one of my earliest clients. Their conversion rate for discovery calls, the very first meaningful conversation they would have with a prospect, was horrible. It was like 8%. So, for every 100 calls they had, they were only getting 8 calls that would move to the next stage. And so we put together a custom playbook for them to train the sales team on how to conduct a high value discovery call. And within the first quarter, they went from 8% to 47%. So they saw a 6x return, or a 6x improvement on that first discovery call. And so that became the foundation for the book. In my experience in working with over 200 companies and their respective sales organizations, most sales professionals have a deep understanding of the product or service that they represent. So they don't have a problem once they get into the latter stages talking about how that product would be implemented or utilized inside of their customer's organization. But what I found is the challenge that most of them faced was how to rightly communicate the value in that first conversation that gives them the opportunity for a second and a third and a fourth conversation. So that's where we really focused our work in helping sales organizations is in communicating high value in those early stage conversations. And obviously, the book is all about that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's spend some time talking a little bit more meaty items. And I know that folks can get some of this content here from the book as well. And I'm all for I'm an avid reader as a blog reader and video. I consume video like there's no tomorrow. I do hate reading books, but I'd be happy to watch a video on the book. I'd be happy to read all kinds of blogs. I'm just a short form type of guy, but many of our listeners are consume books, and I'm positive that we're going to get some value out of this particular conversation. I want to first start out with talking about one of the big things that is top of mind, and that is there's a lot of sales reps and sales leaders who work for company that have a plethora of competitors,
Mm.
whether that's 1, 2, or 10 competitors. My last stop as a corporate VP of sales was at a company, a SaaS company, where I had 21 competitors. And of those 21 competitors, 16 of the 21, excuse me, 17 of the 21 were headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I worked for a
Wow.
SaaS company. I competed against Zoom for events, conferencing, and video collaboration. And it was a tough market. And I think a lot of sellers and sales leaders are challenged, whether you have got 5, whether you've got 17 like I had, on how to differentiate a product or service in a commoditized market. And I want to start out talking about that because I think that's top of mind. And the reason why I want to start talking about that is because in order to be able to convert, you've got to figure out how to differentiate, whether you're dealing with one competitor or you're dealing with 20 competitors. So, talk a little bit about that. How do you differentiate a product or service in a commoditized market?
Yeah, and then that's a great question. It all comes down to the concept of uniqueness, and this is where some behavioral psychology comes into play. Our brains are designed in a way that we're always looking for outliers or things that don't belong or things that stand out as being unique. And uniqueness can show up in a selling conversation two ways. Number one would be uniqueness around the product or service. And so, as a sales professional, even in a commoditized market, you should be able to find some things that are unique to your product or service. And if you want to avoid sounding like all of your competition, you really have to focus the conversation around that uniqueness. Now, if you can't find uniqueness, then what you're going to want to focus the conversation on is your strength. In other words, what causes you to win more times than not in a commoditized market? That needs to become the focal point of the conversation. And so once you've identified uniqueness, and by the way, uniqueness can happen this way. For your listeners, most people wouldn't think of chocolate as being unique. Again, you can find chocolate anywhere. You wouldn't think of peanut butter as being unique. But when you bring the two of them together, what do you have? Reese's peanut butter cups, right? They're unique. Interesting. I actually asked that question in a workshop I did in London, and they actually answered Nutella, and I was like, "Well, I wasn't thinking about Nutella." So uniqueness can sometimes show up in a combination of things, and I'll give you a quick example. I'm doing work for the largest North American floor covering franchise organization, and obviously, floor covering not unique. You could buy floor covering from the big boxes. You've got independent businesses. But what they've been able to do is combine their world class service with the fact that they've got a 4.9 Google star rating across all of North America. They bring those two things together, and they can represent that as being unique, as far as we're the only ones that do that. Now, there's another aspect of uniqueness: the sales profession, how they communicate around the product or service that they represent. Too many salespeople are relying on just the standard PowerPoint presentation. Hey, let me get on Zoom and walk you through PowerPoint. What if they did something different, like whiteboard? Whiteboarding stands out as being unique. So there are a number of things that you can do in the way that you communicate with another human being or communicate with a prospect that is going to feel unique to that prospect and create memory because of how unique and different they were in the way that they communicated the value of their product or service. So those would be the two areas that you would want to focus on: uniqueness, how you present, and then obviously the focal point of the conversation as far as the uniqueness of the product or service.
Interesting. So, this uniqueness we're talking about via the sales process, which you just described, like for example, whiteboarding versus PowerPoints,
Mhm.
the experience that somebody receives in the sales process, right? That makes it memorable, I think is what you're going after. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you mentioned on the product side, and I'll give you an example of something. And going back to my corporate days of selling, I used to manage a then Fortune 16 company, now Fortune 3, I think it is, McKesson Corporation.
Oh, yeah.
And I started out at working at Sprint in telecom. We were selling both wireline and wireless services. On the wireless side, it was the handset, the Sprint PCS handsets. And so we were the smallest player of the three that they had inside of the organization. So what I did was to figure out a competitive advantage to create a unique environment, as I did two very strategic things. One, I saw how they were ordering in their order process for a new vendor, and they had at that time 120,000 employees. So what they were doing was is everybody had to fill out a manual form, and that manual form, then they had to sign, they had to have their manager sign, then they had to fax that form in. So the first step was the individual who was responsible for that, usually on a daily basis, had a stack of orders that were this yay high. And every day he tried to get through them and he couldn't get through them. And it was always anywhere between 2 to 5 weeks before a phone was delivered. So
Mhm.
in multiple meetings, I observed at their desk that they had this set of forms. So here's what I did. I said, well, step one, let me see if I can offset that. So I came in and offered to go into his office, and I said, every day I will come in and I will place those orders for you and put it into your system. All you have to do is train me. So take out the Sprint ones out of that pile, and I'll make the dent for you and put those in. So once I was able to see how they were ordering all the stuff that they were ordering, I would put it into their system. I thought, what if I could create a front end interface with one of our partners that would allow me to automate this for the end user and for the telecom, what did he call him? Telecom manager, I guess, right?
Mhm.
So I had to be there for a good solid month to be able to see what were the trends, what was going on. And then I turned around and went to what we used to call a BSP. I forget what we call it, what the acronym stood for, but it was a service partner. And
Mhm.
I said, hey, I got an opportunity. We'll give you 20% of the revenue if you build out a custom portal that integrates into their SAP platform. And all of these will go through you guys. You'll be able to be our partner, and we'll give you 20% off the monthly recurring. And will you build this out? Your costs. Here's the number of orders that we get on a monthly basis. So they did their calculations and they said, sold. So I went back to the customer and said, hey, I got an idea. What if we built the front end portal that directly integrates into SAP for your users? And they were like, oh my God, that would be great. How much would it cost? I said, $0. They were like, $0? Where do I sign? So we built the portal and we enabled this for the organization after I went in on a daily basis and took the orders off his desk. As such, that entire portal process now, as a result of making it easy and not having to have a end user fill out a form,
Yeah.
sign it, hand it to their manager, which they may not even see, right? And
Yeah.
then fax it over what's fax 21 baud or 16 baud, whatever it was. And this was, by the way, this was 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 20 years ago, 20 years ago. And so we built this all out, and as a direct result, orders from Verizon and AT&T went and Sprint went up.
That's
Now,
awesome.
2 years later, they decided to go out to RFP. We had already invested $5 million in development costs to integrate directly into SAP, and we were getting hundreds of thousands of thousands of orders per month as a
Mhm.
result of taking business away. So when they decided to go out to RFP, we said, "Great, go for it." We came in at the highest price and won the entire set of business because AT&T and Verizon had no way to be able to build up that portal that it took
Yeah.
us almost whatever it was 2 to 5 years to build that portal up. And I that was a very strategic approach to how can we penetrate where we're the smallest player,
Mhm.
we have the worst coverage, right?
Right.
And oh, by the way, we built out coverage into all of their corporate campuses, and we called them. Oh, I can't remember what it was called, but anyways, indoor wireless service centers that would essentially, emit the signal from the furthest closest tower back into the building.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about in terms of trying to find unique opportunities?
It is. It is. I've got another quick example since you're talking about the telcos.
Please.
Um, Years ago, when the iPhone 5 was first released, obviously you had all the carriers that were able to sell an iPhone after AT&T had their exclusivity for a couple of years. So, from a commoditized market standpoint, cellular companies are a great example. They all do the same thing: wireless communication. So the marketing or ad agencies that create commercials for them understand this principle of uniqueness. And there's an example of two different commercials, one for Sprint, one for AT&T. Both are launching and saying, "Hey, we've got the iPhone 5." Sprint at the time decided to offer unlimited data. That's where they planted their flag around uniqueness. So the commercial goes, hey, you've got this amazing life. You now have this new device called an iPhone 5. It can capture pictures and videos and all the amazing things that are going on in your life. Why would you want to limit that experience? Unlimited data, only Sprint. At the exact same time that they're running that commercial, AT&T is running this commercial. One of the comedians from Saturday Night Live is sitting with a bunch of kindergartners, and he goes, "Hey, what's better? Is two better or is one better?" And the kids are like, "Oh, well, two's better." And he goes, "Well, why is two better?" And one of the kids goes, "Well, if you got one laser shooting out of your eyeball, it's just going to have a little bit of damage. But if you got two lasers shooting out of your eyeball, it's going to create a bunch of damage." So he's like, "Oh, so two's better than one." And then they transition to talk and surf only with AT&T. Both of those are classic examples of how each telco decided where's our uniqueness, and then what they did is they built a need for that uniqueness in the front part of the commercial. That's what sales professionals have to do in a commoditized market. Something very, very similar to that.
And as a direct result, after working for Sprint for 14 years, I converted over to AT&T so that I could have simultaneous voice and data.
Right, right, exactly.
And so to your point, yes, that uniqueness was something that we battled against all the time, was the inability to be able to have talk and data at the same exact time. And AT&T really built planted their flag around that. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah. Now, the thing to pay attention to, though, is neither one of those would be unique today.
Exactly. True.
And again, as a sales professional, you have to stay in tune with what is your competition doing? Do they have the ability to talk and surf? Well, I can't make that the focal point of my conversation anymore because the competition is caught up.
Yeah, interesting. So, as you know, Vengreso used to focus primarily on helping organizations with from the pre-hello to the hello, the prospecting side on the training. And then
Mhm.
we converted the company into a SaaS company in August of 2022. And as such, Fly Message has become our flagship product. Now, Fly Message is one of five major competitors in the marketplace, and we actually just surpassed the then number four, and now we are the number four provider in terms of the total number of users. So, uh, as you looked at our product, Fly Message, it's unique in the UI and the user interface, but that wasn't enough. And so, over the last 6 months, we've been planning all the different phases of what we need to do in order to be able to catch up. And there was a review that was written by an investment community about our product versus the number one player out there. And that review was written, and it wasn't bad and it wasn't good, it was neutral. And it called out some very specific things, like there's no product differentiation, like I don't see the uniqueness. And we knew that, and so we knew we had to build out some baselines. However, we are going to be the first and only company, as far as we know, that will build direct now native integration into Outlook, Gmail, LinkedIn, and LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and that's launching next week. As I think about this, and so this is something that's been so important to us, is that we've got to be able to differentiate ourselves, and as we enter into someone's email box, LinkedIn experience, Sales Navigator experience, Outlook experience, right? We need to be able to be front and center so people have this visual of who we are and be able to refer us. And so these are all the things that we've been focused on from a product development. And this piece right here, this uniqueness on the product side, is not just the responsibility of sales. Correct me if
Mhm.
I'm wrong, David, but this is the
Yeah.
responsibility of the chief technology officer, of the product development officer, and of the marketing officer in the organization, thinking about how can I bring value to my user community and bring a competitive differentiator that my salespeople can go sell. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting because we sometimes pull product development into the work that we do with sales organizations because guess what they have to do? They have to sell the sales professional on whatever new feature they're incorporating into the product. Because otherwise the sales professional isn't going to hold that out in the conversations that they're having with prospects and customers. And it's interesting that you bring up this integration because the other question that you have to ask is what problem does that solve for your customer base? What are they able to do differently because you've introduced this new capability? That should be the focal point of your messaging, not, hey, we've got integration. It's, hey, we can save you 2 hours in a day, an hour in a day. Imagine what you could do with that additional hour. So again, sales professionals need to understand they don't really care about what your product is and does. What they care about is the benefit to them and what they can do differently and how this is going to change their life. And I think sometimes product development gets lost in that. They get lost in, well, technically this is really cool. What if we incorporated AI into this product? Well, okay, if you're going to do that just to say that you've got AI, so what? What problem is the AI going to help your customer base solve? And so, yeah, product development absolutely has to be involved in understanding the importance of uniqueness, but more from a problem solving standpoint.
Love it. Great advice. All right. So we started on this path here. How then do you elevate the value of your product or service as a salesperson or as a sales leader?
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, having worked with over 200 different companies in a workshop, I typically look at the room full of sales professionals and I ask a really silly question. Is communicating value important in the conversations you're having with prospects? And of course, everybody looks at me and goes, well, yeah. And then I ask the question, okay, if it's important, then how do human beings perceive value? I've never gotten a right answer to that question from a behavioral psychology standpoint. Part of the reason is I don't think many of the sales professionals that are listening have read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. So Kahneman is widely regarded as the foremost renowned behavioral psychologist in the world today. I mean, he's at the pinnacle of that field. What a lot of people don't realize is that he won a Nobel Prize in 2003, I think it was, in economics. Now, Mario, think about that. He's a behavioral psychologist. He won the most prestigious award in economics in 2003. Part of the reason that he won that award is he cracked the code on how human beings perceive value. Here's what he found. And by the way, when I ask that question, the typical answer is, well, it's all about the benefit to the person that I'm communicating with. That's how they perceive value. Or it's this balance between cost and benefit. And that's part of the equation. So they're partly right, but it's not the whole picture. So here's what Kahneman found. Value is perceived in a contrasting worldview. Literally, it's this is what your world looks like, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, without my product, contrasted with this is what your world could look like with my product. And it's in the side by side contrast of those two worldviews that we as human beings perceive value. So here's a quick example. I participate in a fundraising bike ride every July called Bike to the Beach. It's helped to raise money for kids with autism. So where this bike ride takes place is in the middle of Delaware. So they drop us off, or we have a starting point in rural Delaware, and then we ride to Foley Beach. It's a 50-mile bike ride. Last year, the organizers of the race didn't realize that they were dropping us on a road that had just recently been stripped of the top coat of pavement. If you know anything about street bike riding, that's not a recipe for success. It's rough. You're worried about your tires popping. For 5 miles, it was a horrible ride for myself and the five other men that were riding with me. After 5 miles, we hit the newly paved section of road. Immediately, every one of the riders exclaimed, "Oh my goodness, this is like the smoothest road that I've ever been riding on." Mario, they wouldn't have said that if we had started the ride on the smooth road, because there would be no contrast. So it's up to the sales professional to create that contrasting worldview in the conversations that they have with their prospects, specifically in a discovery call. You have to create that contrast. And the contrast really is around, hey, here are the challenges or problems that you're facing today. Here's the impact of those challenges. And then contrast that with, here's what you could do differently. And the mistake that a lot of sales professionals make is once they start to understand this concept, is they go from talking about their prospects' problems or challenges, and then they shift the conversation to what we do to solve that problem is, and they start talking about the product. You lose your contrast when you do that because you went from talking about them to talking about you. Now, this is one of the biggest challenges that a sales professional will face because as human beings, we're hardwired to see the world through our point of view, not through the point of view of another human being. And if you're going to describe what your prospect can do differently, you have to put yourself into their point of view, into their seat. And then think about, oh, okay, if they have access to my product, what would they be able to do differently? So you start the conversation with, imagine if you could do this, or what if you could do this? And you can't make any reference to the product. You're literally just painting a picture of a better world using the product or service that you represent. That's how you elevate the value of your product or service in early stage conversations, is by creating that contrasting worldview in the conversation.
Now you're getting into probably another question, which is how do human beings make buying decisions? And you're obviously giving this advice as a result of how the buyer is thinking. So touch on that about how do we make buying decisions that supports what it is that you just mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So another behavioral psychologist, Antonio Damasio, in the early 2000s, he discovered something about human behavior that we've long suspected about how human beings make decisions. And that is, we make decisions based on meaning and emotion and justify our decisions with logic and reason. Now, the interesting thing is, in 35 years of leading sales teams, most sales organizations try and build a logical case for why a prospect should use their product. That's only half the equation. There has to be meaning and emotion involved in the conversation as well. Interesting side note, had an opportunity to do a workshop for a room full of Oracle consultants. These were by far and away the most accomplished sales professionals I've ever been in the room with. They heard me make that statement that we make decisions based on meaning and emotion and justify it with logic and reason. And there was a gentleman sitting off to my right that raised his hand. I said, "Yeah, do you have a question?" He goes, "No, I couldn't disagree more with what you just said." I said, "Well, why are you disagreeing with it?" He goes, "Because I'm the most logical person you'll ever meet. I make every decision filtered through logic and reason. As a matter of fact, if you were to compare me to Mr. Spock, he would look like an emotional mess. That's how logical I am." So I did something in the moment. I looked at him and I said, "Okay, can you tell me what's the last major purchase that you made, either for your business or for you personally?" And he goes, "Oh, that's easy. I bought a car 6 months ago." I said, "Don't say another word." He goes, "Why?" I said, "Just hang with me." So I looked at the room. I said, "I want you to take your logic hat out of your backpack or whatever, and put it on your head, and then answer this question for me. What makes and models of cars would you buy if it were strictly a logical exercise?" How do you think they answered, Mario?
Some sort of electric vehicle, one that gets super good gas mileage. Probably the Honda, the what is the Prius, Toyota Prius, or Hondas. It's whatever those cars are. They get like 70 miles to a gallon or something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So they're giving great answers to that question. I turned back to the gentleman. He's obviously very uncomfortable now. And I turned back to him and I said, "Would you mind telling your teammates what kind of car did you buy?" And he tried to whisper it to me. He goes, "I bought a BMW." I said, "The ultimate driving machine, that German engineering, the Corinthian leather, the driving experience you have on the road." He goes, "All right, all right, all right. You know what? It was an emotional decision, but I got a great deal." I said, "There's the logical justification for the emotional decision that you made." Here's what he didn't take into account. And this, again, this is going back to some of the work that Kahneman has done. We always have two different thought processes going on: conscious and subconscious. What he didn't give any credit to was the subconscious thought process that was involved in making the decision. So what Damasio found is that they did research on individuals that had damage to the limbic part of their brain. The limbic part of the brain is where the seat of emotions are. And in the research that they would do, they'd have people that had that brain damage to their limbic brain in the room, and they'd go, "Okay, it's lunchtime. You need to choose between peanut butter and jelly or roast beef. Which one do you want?" And the people that they were studying would answer with, "Well, logically, it would make more sense probably to do roast beef." And they go, "Great. So you want roast beef?" "No, no, no, no. I haven't decided yet." They literally could not make a decision because the emotional part of their brain had been damaged. And so, what sales professionals need to understand is there needs to be an emotional element that shows up in the conversations that you're having. Because apart from the absence of emotion, it's going to make it really difficult for a prospect to make a decision.
Very good illustrations there, and I love the example of the BMW. Definitely made a decision on emotion and then used logic to justify it, which was this pricing
Right.
that he was getting behind it. So, how then does a seller or a sales leader teach a sales rep how to go about uh, with this decision? Sorry, with helping to figure out how the buyer is going to make a decision based upon meaning and emotion.
Yeah. So to answer that question, I'm going to share a visual here real quick. So you should see on your screen a just a simple whiteboard diagram. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
affirmative.
Okay. Good. 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 This is how you build a high value discovery call. It's a very simple roadmap that you can follow, and I'll do the best that I can for those of you that are just listening to the audio. So every salesperson has a product that is something and does something. And the mistake that you don't want to make is just talk a lot about what your product is and does. Because in an initial conversation with a prospect, they're trying to figure out what it means to them. And they're not going to really listen with the same attention if they don't understand what it means to them when you start describing what the product is and does. So, what you want to do instead is look into what your product is and does and find the elements that are unique in solving the problems for the person that you're going to have a conversation with. That becomes your value position, not a value proposition, because a proposition is just a suggestion. You want to take a position in the marketplace around your unique ability to solve a problem. That becomes the focal point of the conversation. Now, years ago, sales professionals used to ask this question all the time in an initial conversation. Mario, what's keeping you awake at night? Please don't ask that question in today's world. Again, as a sales professional, you should know the problems and challenges that the person that you're selling to is facing, because this thing called the internet is going to give you a lot of access to that information. So instead, you want to start the conversation with, hey, in talking with other professionals like yourself, we hear that they're challenged with, and then go ahead and telegraph what those challenges are. By using that third party reference, you're not assuming that they have the problem. And again, by the way, human beings don't like having fingers pointed at them saying, hey, you got a problem. So use the third party reference. And the other thing that that's going to do is it's going to start build credibility with the person that you're having a conversation with, because they're going to be thinking, this person understands my world and they talk to people like me all the time. So they may have something interesting or intriguing or valuable to share in the early part of the conversation. So once you've communicated the challenges, then you also want to give voice to the impact, because challenges don't exist in a vacuum. Think about a sales leader. A challenge for a sales leader would be they lose a sales rep to a competitor. Well, that challenge doesn't live in a vacuum. The impact of that is going to be that the sales leader is not going to have that person in their seat producing revenue. And the impact of that is they've got to go spend money and hire another salesperson. And the impact of that is that that salesperson that they hire, it's going to be 3 to 6 months before they're productive. So it's not enough just to talk about the challenges. You also have to telegraph what's the impact inside of the organization for that challenge. Once you've done a really good job of that, then you can shift the conversation into painting a picture of a better world by describing what they can do differently with your product or service. And again, it's important to make that description without giving detail around this is what we do. Again, you just want to paint a picture of what they're going to be able to do differently because they have access to the product. If you do a really good job of that, they're going to want you to prove it. That sounds amazing. What you just said, that sounds amazing. I want to have that. Prove to me it's real. Once you've done that, then they're going to look at you and go, okay, Mario, how do you do that? How is it that you're going to create this better world for me? How does that work? Now, when you start talking about what your product is and does, they're going to be listening with different ears and really paying attention, because they understand the value associated with your product and what it means to them.
Got it. Great diagram. Appreciate that. And for those of you that are listening in, hey, our podcast is also on YouTube as well with Mr. Dave Kurkjian. You'll want to make sure you watch that if you want to if you want to see that particular diagram he just showed. But great audio walkthrough as well, David. One last question for you as we start wrapping this up in terms of our show here, and it, if we think about some of the techniques that we need to teach sellers. What are some of the techniques that you teach salespeople on how to utilize in early stage selling conversations?
The best answer to that question are questions. Some of the best techniques are the ability to ask insightful questions. So there's a couple of questions that should show up in that early stage conversation. When you've telegraphed the challenges and the impact of the challenges on the prospect's world, you just simply want to look at them and go, hey, Mario, that's what we're hearing and seeing and talking with other professionals like yourself. I'm curious, what does that look like in your world? And the use of look is intentional because we as human beings remember things visually. We don't remember things in a ticker tape of words. It's always a visual image that we conjure up. But it's also a great open-ended question. So they can go a number of different directions. They can validate the challenges that you just communicated and go, yeah, we're experiencing some of the same challenges, but we're also dealing with this. Then the follow-up question to that should be, how have you tried to solve that problem? Because by asking that question, you're going to get context around, have they been using a competitor? Are they trying to develop something internally to solve that problem? So you're going to get the necessary context that you need to understand, what am I competing against? What have they tried? And then the final question that you can ask is, what's the impact on your customers if you're not able to solve that problem? How does it impact your team? How does it impact your organization? There are a number of impact questions that you can ask. And what this is doing is it's allowing the prospect to live in the pain that they're currently experiencing in their world, which, by the way, pain is a very strong emotion. Now, the final question, again, I ask this all the time in workshops. Hey, Mario, you get to the end of a selling conversation. What question do you ask the prospect? And more times than not, the answer I get is, are you ready to buy? And I look at the room and I go, well, okay, what if they answer the question no? Where do you go from there? You can't recover from that. There's a better open-ended question that you can ask at the end of the selling conversation. It's simply, hey, Mario, we've covered a good bit of ground today in our call. I'm curious, what do you think? And again, give them room to give positive feedback. Well, I like this, I like that. Ask a clarifying question. I'm not sure about how you do that. How does that work? Or they may give you an objection. Hey, that all sounds good, but I have a problem with this. And so by asking, what do you think? It's telegraphing to the person that you're having a conversation with, hey, I respect your thoughts. I respect, what you're thinking right now. Can you share that with me? And by doing that, you're going to get the necessary information that you need in order to determine, where do I go in this conversation to get them to the next step in the sales process?
Fantastic insights, David. Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing some of these things. If someone wants to get connected with you, what's the best way? Is it on LinkedIn, Twitter? How should they reach out to you?
It'd probably be the website, mastermessaging.com. Or again, you can find me on LinkedIn, David Kurkjian. Just make sure that you don't confuse me with Tim Kurkjian, the ESPN broadcaster for Major League Baseball. And by the way, we're not related, and we never could figure out where our family lines cross. But yeah, those would be the best places to follow us.
And if you're looking for David on LinkedIn, it's David, of course, as normal, Kurkjian. So make sure you reach out, and please, please, please send a personalized connection request message. Tell David that you heard him on the Modern Selling Podcast so that he knows why you're coming to him. David, I got two more questions for you. And that is, if someone wants to get the book, what's the best way to be able to reach out and get 6x convert more prospects to customers?
Yeah, so we're on most of the online retail outlets, obviously including Amazon. or you can order the book directly from our website, mastermessaging.com. So you can get it either of those places.
Fantastic. So last question. Always ask this of all my guests. All-time favorite movie, what is it?
It'd have to be the first Matrix movie. There's just something about that whole concept, that whole dynamic of a alternate world that we have no idea that we're living in. Yeah, I'd have to answer with The Matrix. A close second would be Lord of the Rings.
There you go. Matrix and Lord of the Rings. I love the way you think. Fantastic. Wait, hey, for all of you listening in right now, make sure you reach out to my friend David and do not turn that dial. We've got this last important message for you right now. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download Fly Message, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.